everybody. This is Bob Goodwin, and welcome to another episode of Career Club Live. Today is a very special episode because we're doing something we don't do very often, which is we've got a repeat guest with us today. So back in 2022, we had the Band of Sisters come on. We had Lori Marcus and C. Nicholson come on, two former Pepsi executives, board members, executive advisors to major companies who had written a book called You Should Smile More with four of their other colleagues, so six total sisters in the Band of Sisters, and a really phenomenal book talking about microaggressions and just sort of the different things that happen to women in last 3 years, and there's a lot to uncover of what they've learned, what's different, and what the future looks like. So with that, Lori and C, welcome.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you, Bob.
No, thank you. So very quickly, just to get people caught up here a little bit, C, you like to do handstands all over the world. Where's the most interesting place you've done a handstand since we spoke last?
I just got back. Actually, in the last 6 weeks, I've been to Portugal and did all sorts of handstands all over Portugal. And then I just got back about a week ago from southern Italy. I was in Puglia, which is the heel of the boot, and the weather was great. And so those were the most recent.
I want to go on a handstand trip with you. That sounds like fun. Lori, anything fun going on in your world these days?
I have my 35th wedding anniversary next week. And so I'm going to, with my husband, to my happy place, which is a spa up in the Berkshires called Canyon Ranch. I think I've probably been there about 35 times.
Oh, my goodness.
And so while C is doing handstands all over the world, I will be doing yoga and getting a facial in the Berkshires.
Awesome. Well, I think you newlyweds are very cute because I will be married 39 years in November. Gosh. I know, right? Well, I'm from the South. We start young. So,
there you go.
No. So let's just kind of get people level set kind of from the get-go. What initially inspired you all to write You Should Smile More?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I've told the story before. We didn't set out to write a book. It was nowhere sort of on my bucket list. Although I think in hindsight, I'm one of those people that would like to have written a book, but I had no desire to actually write a book. And we were at we were at a dinner with Indra Nooyi, who had just stepped down as the CEO and chair of the board of PepsiCo. Back in 2019, we're at a small dinner, six of us or so in Greenwich, Connecticut. And we started talking about, I don't remember how it came up, how I was one of the co-founders of the first ever women's resource network at Pepsi in 1993. And I think, in hindsight, I think we thought we'll do a women's resource network. We'll fix all that stuff. And then some days before I had children, someday that will be all fixed. I use the analogy of littering. We used to litter. Then there was a whole campaign. We stopped littering. We don't wake up every day in 2025 and be like, yay, we're not littering, or like seatbelts. We don't wake up every day and congratulate ourselves that we wear seatbelts. We just wear seatbelts. So I think I thought in hindsight, we'll just do this women's thing. We'll get that all fixed. We'll get women in the C-suite, women in boards, women pay equity, all that kind of good stuff. And then by the time someday, if I'm lucky enough to have children, by the time they come into the workplace, everything will be good. So here it was 2019. My second of two daughters was about to graduate from college. And I at least had this realization that we had changed some things. We had made some things better. I'm going to cry talking about this, but at the end of the day, here it was. And really things were not that much better or different. And so then we started, this was going on in my head. Terce's thinking, I wasn't thinking any of that, but we started talking with Indra and amongst ourselves about the little things at work, not just at PepsiCo, but at other places that made us feel like we couldn't bring our full selves to work. And the things that made us feel like we didn't fully belong. And I think the amazing thing is this group of women, we had talked about everything. I mean, we'd complained about Indra behind her back about strat plan meetings on the Monday after Thanksgiving. We complained about Steve Reineman before her. I mean, you complain about everything, it's just we had talked about everything and yet we had never talked about this topic. And each of us had felt it. Each of us had felt these little micro moments or microaggressions, but we had never actually talked about them. And so that was kind of what got the conversation started. And then I'll let C talk about how that dinner sort of somehow turned into a book.
Well, this is nothing to do with Me Too. All that stuff's very important, but this was all at the other end of it. And I think that we started trying to, after we all started having this conversation and realizing how many of these, small micro moments that we each had, many of them very similar to each other, some different. We thought, gosh, is this just our generation? It just happened to us. So we went out and started talking to, we did primary research. We did interviews with hundreds of younger women and people that were much earlier in their career. And unfortunately, anything we talk about, because we've done like 50 plus presentations now to corporations and different organizations, and anything that we write in the book, unfortunately, is alive and well today. And I think that was shocking to us, that these things are still around today. And some of it is because of the fact that no one talks about it, because of the fact that, again, these things are you just feel like they're too small to mention. You don't want to be petty. And so you don't talk about it, then 30 years later, these same things that are small and irritating, and they're just like little rocks in your backpack, and they're just any one item is that big of a deal. But in totality, they become very, kind of irritating, and just it kind of wear you down.
So how did that, go from that kind of realization at dinner to turning into a book?
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, initially, I think we thought we'd go out and, after we did these interviews, we thought we spoke at a couple conferences, and we thought that would be the case. Then all of a sudden COVID happened, and obviously everyone, and we're now all communicating via Zoom. And at one point we're like, gosh, we have, we got 3 weeks to do nothing but write the book. Let's do this. And of course, COVID spent a lot longer than that.
3 weeks,
so I think that during that period of time, we then switched the order, and then started work, because we had time to write the book, and we were obviously constrained with doing anything else. And so it was just interesting. None of us had ever written a book before, but we just started. We wanted to put a lot of our personal stories and our personal points of view into it. And we all came up with, we'd come up with a topic, and we just, the floodgates would open up on writing this in like a Google Doc. And that's kind of how it started, and just got a lot of momentum.
I think, Bob, what's interesting about the topic, both at the sort of, not to get all meta about it, but at that first dinner back in 2019, and then when we did the interviews, and then, of course, when we've been out speaking for the past 2 or 3 years, is every time we do it, you look in the audience and people have that same look on their face, like, oh, I thought I was the only one who experienced this. I thought I was the only one who got asked to take the notes, or I thought I was the only one who thought it was weird in a people planning meeting when they were like, oh, we should offer that job to Jill. And they're like, no, we can't offer that job to Jill. Her husband runs a hedge fund in New York. She would never take a promotion that involved moving to Cincinnati, blah, blah, blah. And, and everyone sort of like, they hear these little things, being called a girl, if you're a woman in the workplace, all these little things, and everyone just thought it was them. But because they're so little, no one ever talked about it. Like if you say it out loud, you sound kind of petty. And so I think over and over, both in, like C said, these hundreds of hours of interviews that we did. And then every time we go out and speak, it's like people have, that expression, I hate it, but I'll use it. Like I was today years old when I realized that I'm not the only one who hates being called a girl in the workplace, or I'm not the only one who was told to smile more or smile less or be too emotional or blah, blah, blah. It's just everyone thought it was just them. And then it's a little bit freeing when for women, they're like, oh my God, it's not just me. And then men, because again, we're all about like calling men in and allyship and all that. And so for men, literally very senior men, they'll sit in the audience. One of our first presentations, the guy was literally like a division CEO at a Fortune 100 company. And he was like, wait, can I ask one more question? Like, what else might I be doing? Realized this was a thing. Like the amount of men who say to us, do women get told to smile more? And women, like their eyes are falling out of their head. They're rolling. hard. Like if I had $1 for every time I was told to smile more, I wouldn't have to have this dumb job, And so women are just, they're exhausted by 20, 30 years of being told to smile more or smile less or whatever. And men are like, oh, I didn't know that. Just perfectly innocently. And I don't think it's willful ignorance. I really don't. I think they're just like, oh, I didn't know that women get told to smile more. Say more about that and say more about some other things while you're on stage. And then kind of our method of like educate, show the research, and then, what can you do as the woman, as an ally of any gender, as a boss of any gender? What can you do in the moment, like in the meeting, literally, what can you say or do or not say or do after the meeting, before the next meeting? So it's super practical. So you can tell from kind of the energy in our voices, I'm not sure we knew that we had anything there. And every time we speak, we get this, oh my God, thank you. That's so helpful. So
yeah,
I think one of my biggest surprising, and we've talked to, whether it's, educational, NYU, MIT, Indiana University, we've spoken law firms, advertising agencies, financial companies, just name an industry, the government, nonprofit, some more blue collar, a lot of white collar. And I feel like the reaction we get is shockingly always the exact same. I mean, like you think that it would resonate more here versus here. And I have to say it's been so consistent because I feel like some of these things are just on the tip of everyone's tongue that everyone's aware of them, but no one says anything. And we give people an audience, a forum to be able to talk about that. Like, oh my God, that is irritating, or that is like, you did that too, or how is a way to maneuver around it. So I think that the feedback has been so consistent. And then I feel like we've done all these presentations flown all over around the country. And I think that it's been, we always say we're not academics. We're not HR. We're all operators. And then we kind of give stories. And some of the stuff we're like, gosh, I didn't handle this well, or I was part of the problem. We're very self-effacing. And I think that because of the fact that there's multiple of us do it, it's interesting because the fact that it's just not just one person's point of view. There's different people talking. And, they kind of just show the camaraderie. And I think people really buy into this. Wow, you guys do really seem like you are this band of sisters. You are the support network. Mm-hmm. You have maintained and I think a lot of people think that that's, they're like, how do I do that? Or I should figure out how to, put more time and effort so that I stay connected to people that I really, respect. So that's kind of fun to kind of see happen. But I think we've gotten so much feedback. People are like, gosh, we've had so many presentations over the last 5 years on a variety of topics. And they're like, this has been the best one. And they're like, who would have ever thought that, something talking about, an all gender bias would be the most entertaining and insightful. And it's also, but I think it's consistent feedback. So it's been really energizing to go out and talk to just a variety of people. And, we hear people at the end, they follow up and we really kind of it was added to the richness of what we talk about because we can use those examples as well.
Let me put an oar in the water here real quick. So first of all, Lori, going back to something you said about your daughters and stuff, I have a daughter. And that was one of the reasons I was initially very interested in speaking with you all, 3 years ago now, is because I love my daughter and I don't want her experiencing things in the workplace. And I can't remember if I shared this story on the original episode or not. I should probably be careful what I'm going to say. But basically, a very inappropriate comment was made to her. And it's like, oh, no, I was just kidding. And it's like, one, no, you weren't. And two, you would have never said that to a man or anything that resembles that. That's one. Two, the title. It's so funny since I've met you all and, I advocate for your book and what you all are teaching people. And invariably, when I say, the title of the book is great, it's You Should Smile More, every woman goes, oh. And every guy's like, huh? Like, what? Like, what's that? What's that mean? Kind of the puzzled dog look. And it's like, yeah. And every woman instantly gets it.
Even without, when you see it, it brings it further along. But what's funny is for men, especially before we had the book, a physical manifestation. And I would say it to some of my best friends and bosses at Pepsi, men, and they would say, oh, that's a great idea. People should smile more, almost like it was asked or something. And I'm like, yes, and like, yes, it would be great if the whole world smiled more. Not what we're writing about, but yes, I agree with you.
Yes,
So it's funny the difference.
but I think, just back to like why this is so resonant with your audience is because this is all lived experience, right? This is, not, some kind of, hey, here's a philosophy, here's kind of this random idea that, after, 3 glasses of red wine seems like a good idea. It's like, no, this is like real. And to y'all's point, it's like, wait a minute, I'm not the only one.
Yes.
And the fact that none of them are just like super overt, like that is so gross. Like, of course, that's a problem. And for people who have not read the book, for me, first of all, there were several kind of like, ooh, that hurt. So I learned you're not allowed to talk about the girl in accounting. So, okay. And several other things. Good idea, Greg. But what I love about the book, among many things, is the way that there's a high level of actionability, right? So here's the thing. If it's happening to you, here's what you should do. If you see this happening, here's what you should do. If you're the boss, and every chapter has kind of that consistent, and since we, from various points of view, but you all have a strong CPG background, market research background, I'm very into what, so what, now what. I think that's like the greatest model ever. And so, each chapter is a what, and then it gets into, so what, why does this matter? And then now what should I do about it? And it's got a bias for action that, again, irrespective of where you kind of are in this happening, there's something for you to take away and that you can go do today to, do a micro correction, if you will.
We actually, that's a big point we make on this, because the fact that we're like, these micro moments that happen to people are solved by micro actions. So it's not like you're hearing a presentation about something like, oh, this, like, how do we build a train from San Francisco to LA? It's like, well, that's going to take 10 years and $10 billion. And just you're like, oh my God, where would I play a role? And this is like, wow. In some cases, it's like you could just do. We generally give people, here are 5 things you can do in like this afternoon. In some cases, it's just not saying something or being or saying something or thinking, would I say that if I didn't say it to a man, should I say it to a woman? Or gosh, is all the office housework always going towards, or more of it going to the women because they're good at taking notes and they're going to be conscientious and send them out. So I always like, gosh, Lori's so good with that. Let's have Lori take the notes. And we never think, gosh, let's have Bob take, just That's small things that can make just a huge impact. And we've actually gotten stories back from people that said, I read the book and now let me tell you something different I did because of that. I mean, actually the one example that I just raised of someone take the notes, there was a great story of a guy that a very senior CEO that had read that and thought about it. And the next day he was at a meeting with 2 of his senior leaders, and they were going to kind of whiteboard an idea. And it was a senior male and a senior female, and everyone liked each other, and they'd been working together for years. And Lori approached the whiteboard like she always did. And all of a sudden the boss said, hey, you know what, Lori, you always take the notes. Hey, Bob, why don't you do it? And then Bob did it. And it was the meeting went on. Everything was fine. Later on, Lori, in this example, wrote the boss and said, I've always enjoyed working for you. But I cannot tell you how important that was that you did that. Like, this is just amazing. I just feel so seen. This is like, and this guy was like this. He was already considered a good boss. He's like this hero. And all he did was just say, hey, Bob, why don't you take the notes today versus Lori? It wasn't like this was some major effort. This is just literally just like, hey, why don't we rotate it? And he was like, hero. So we have all these kind of examples of stuff like this. So they're really easy solutions, which I think people like, because it's like they're practical and they're quick and that you can do them today, not like, let me double down and in 4 months, maybe I can think of one. So that's been, I think, part of our success.
Well, I'll just add on one story to that. Like I said, we love the sort of the action orientation of it. Because again, 30 years in corporate America, I always wonder, like, where did the flip chart notes go from all those offsites where you were there for 3 days and everyone captured everything and then someone rolled them up and then they went to the land of flip chart note graveyard and nothing ever happened. So we're very action oriented people. Some would say over caffeinated, but There was one that we were at. And again, the fact that there's, 5 or 6 of us it's a feature, not a bug, because we're all wired so differently, which is a little bit back to our consumer background. Not all consumers are the same. Not all employees or colleagues are the same. So we really try and lean into the fact that people are motivated differently. They have different styles, all of that. You have different levels of psychological security. But one of my favorite stories, there's a great little anecdote about like corporate swag bags. And how it's always extra large men's golf shirts. And I literally, like, we joked at some point, we counted up, I don't know, it was probably like 134, like how many extra large men's golf shirts we had between the 6 of us. And you just get one in a meeting and you're like, oh, great. My husband will like it. My brother will like it. My brother-in-law will like this, whatever. I feel like you could track the Pepsi logo through the years. Stations, whatever. But we just you don't think anything of it. You're like, great, another extra large men's golf shirt, whatever. And we have a fun little picture of like, this would be the equivalent of, and C usually does this, if you go to a meeting and you open up the swag bag and there's like an extra small women's pink yoga top. Like, just imagine that, right? And it just wouldn't happen, right? And so we're telling this story, and it always gets a laugh, but it's a learning laugh, right? Like, people laugh, but they're like, oh, you know what? You're right. So we're at one of the meetings and we hear this thing, and it's like, we can't tell exactly what people are saying, but it's like shoes. It wasn't a Bruce Springsteen concert, so they weren't saying Bruce, and it was like, they were literally like humming like shoes. And then we're like, what is that? And they were like, we just gave out the swag bag and we literally had men's golf shoes in the swag bag. Like, you're like, how did we do this? We have like, half of the people in the room are women, and we literally just downsized the shoes for women's sizes. And it was just sort of this thing of, here they are, like, they're in the game, no pun intended. And they just didn't even think about it. So it's a little bit, if you can sort of just wake people up and make them conscious of things. And then it's so easy to say, what can you say or do? And the one thing I just want to emphasize, early on, C was with me. We did an event for a colleague of ours who's at a different company now, someone we know from Pepsi. And as he was introducing us, he said something about like, oh, am I allowed to say that or whatever? And I always say, like, that's a thing we would love to take out of people's vocabulary, because we're not like the cancel culture police. We're not like, you can't say that, you can't say that, right. Like making people trip over their words. You said it earlier, Bob, which is like, think about, if you wouldn't say it to a man, would you be saying it to a woman? Like, just we used to say early on in our careers, like, it wasn't about gender bias necessarily, but it was about behavior. And I remember Steve Reineman was the CEO of our company at the time. And I remember somebody saying, well, is this something, if you were called into Steve Reineman's office, would you be comfortable talking about this decision that you made or whatever? If it was on the front page of the New York Times, would you be comfortable with it? And it's not the ultimate acid test, but it's a pretty good acid test. And I feel like it's the same thing sort of about some of this gender bias. Is just think a minute, just mind the gap, just think a little bit before you speak. And is it something that you wouldn't say it to a man, then why you're saying it to a woman? So I think it's, again, we're trying to get a little bit away. I think there's been so much backlash to the whole politically correct and woke culture and all that. And I'm like, how about we just throw that all away and just think about, like I said, it's so simple about like taking the notes or things like that, or offering someone a promotion. No one ever says, well, we're not going to offer that promotion to Bob because his wife's a lawyer in New York, and I bet they wouldn't leave New York. We don't say that. We're like, well, let Bob make that decision about whether they want to relocate or not. So it's just about just reframing things.
C, could you talk for a minute about things like the meeting before the meeting that happens? Because, I mean, that's another just like highly correctable thing, that if you're being, empathetic, have a little bit of an inclusion mindset. I'd like for you to talk about that, and then maybe good idea, Greg, because I want to give people some other real examples of things that would be not intentional, but very impactful. So can you pick that up?
Yeah. So actually, the meeting before the meeting is actually one example of a much larger. The point we try to make on that one is there's every company has their own corporate culture, and a lot of it's not written down of how you do things. And so it's not a trick. It's just not stuff isn't written down. Like, do you send pre-reads out before a meeting, or is there a meeting before the meeting, or whatever the case may be? And a lot of this gets passed down informally. Like, it could be like you're about to go out for a run at lunch with someone, and you're on the golf course, or you're at a bar at night, or you're headed to the airport, or whatever. And some of these situations, women are not in these situations. Women are not in the men's locker room after a workout for someone to say, oh my gosh, I hear blah blah blah, I got to make sure I have this done. So in some cases, some of these more informal things women don't get them as quickly, just because they're just not in all the situations. So in that one, Mitzi gives an example of how she went to this meeting to ask for a budget, a big budget request, as everyone was, and everyone else sailed through their presentation, no problem. She just kept on getting asked question after question after question after question after question, and she couldn't figure out why. And then she realized, like, everyone else had pre-wired it with the boss ahead of time, so that he knew exactly what was coming. With Mitzi, it was the first time she was doing it, and before that there wasn't this me before the meeting. So, and that's an example of, like, with this boss in this particular culture, that was like, you would pre-wire it. And so now she knows, like, anyways, but like, so that's kind of an example of that one, is just be aware that we want everyone to kind of know the informal culture, make sure you pass that information on.
Well, part of what I'm thinking about too, though, is if I remember the example right from the book, is like the little kind of chatter before the meeting is about the Eagles game.
Oh yeah, so on that point, actually, let me expound on that.
And again, you're sort of just being left out. Go ahead, C.
Well, I was just going to say on that one is that one, I think that there is often a conversation before the meeting actually starts, and a lot of times I feel like it often can be dominated by men talking about sports. So that's a very common thing. Like, hey, are the Knicks going to win tonight? Blah, 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 blah. Right. And so I think a lot of times you kind of look around to see is everyone kind of, are a lot of people included in this conversation, or is it just two kind of people talking?
And now you've got somebody picking up their phone, fake looking at their phone because it's so awkward and uncomfortable.
Yeah. So they're not talking. And the other thing is, like, if you're not involved in that, if you are involved in the conversation, then it's just like you're in it. And then all of a sudden the meeting starts, you're just that much more confident and much more likely to be able to be part of it. Like, hey, throw your idea out, everything kind of flows. If you're not part of it, which I think initially, I used to think that some of these conversations early in my career were just like, I can be more efficient. I got 17 things to do with my emails and voicemail, whatever, and I could be doing that versus talk about that. So I thought I was being more efficient, not engaged. And even though in many of these conversations, I probably could have held my own on these conversations. And then all of a sudden it just hit me that, like, this is building these relationships and building trust and building familiarity was so much more important. I could do those 7 things later, but me kind of building a relationship with these guys, so I'd hear the informal stuff and be involved in things, and them wanting me to be on task force was so much more important than me getting 7 things off my list. And so I think we, tell people, like, that's important time that to kind of build relationships and familiarity. So don't lose those opportunities.
Yeah. And what's interesting, Bob, and you would know this as someone who does coaching and other things, is one of the things I tell people is, even if it's a face-to-face meeting, pretend that it's a Zoom and you could put it on mute for a second and pay attention to the meeting dynamics. Because what you see is that whole, like, at the table, but not in the conversation. I mean, we give the example of it's men talking about the Eagles game or the Knicks game, whatever. It's just as boring if I'm there talking about the pit and you don't watch the pit, or I'm talking about White Lotus and you don't watch White Lotus, or God forbid, I'm talking about my kids, because there's nothing that's interesting than other people talking about their kids. And so the point is, if you think about, like, who's engaged, who's leaning forward versus who's kind of, they're there, they're at the table, but they're not in the conversation. And then you think about it, whether you're the boss, maybe don't always be the last person to walk into the meeting, but even if you're a senior person or someone with a good level of psychological safety, look at who's not maybe being included and maybe broaden the conversation a little bit to include them. Again, not everybody is as comfortable in situations like that, but we also did notice that women, what C said about how she was early in her career, she's like, I'm going to be efficient. I'm going to use this 5 minutes to get stuff done. At the end of the day, that's probably not the best idea, because the soft sort of relationships and trust that you build are important.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Stacey Harris.
And this is Terry Zipper, and we're the host of the two podcasts under the HR Huddle.
On Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, we uncover the latest trends, truths, and challenges from Sapient Insight Group's groundbreaking research and our analyst insights, serving up everything you need to know about HR tech with no sugarcoating.
And on HR, we have a problem. We tackle the toughest workplace challenges head on, offering you expert advice and actionable solutions to help HR leaders thrive in today's fast-changing world. Whether you want the scoop on tech or tools to solve people problems, we've got you covered.
Take a listen and subscribe. If you want to become part of our community, we'd love to see you.
Last one, and then we can move on unless there's one that you would rather do. But good idea, Greg.
Great idea, Greg. So I'll start. So this is we've all seen it. You're in a meeting and someone says something, you say something and people kind of talk over you, and then you might say something again and someone talks over you. And then about 10 minutes later, somebody says pretty much the same idea, maybe with a few different words in it. And we'll call him Greg, and everyone's like, that's the greatest idea we've ever heard. Great idea, Greg. And you're like, again, you can't say out loud because you sound like a jerk. Wait, that was my idea. I said that 10 minutes ago. You just can't say it. You sound like so small if you say that. So you just sort of like, you grind your teeth a little bit and you roll your eyes in your head and you just let it go. And the reality of it is that this is an area where everybody plays a part. So if you're a person in the room, you don't have to be the boss. If you're somebody and then you hear that, you can say, you're not saying, that was Lori's idea. You can just say, oh, I love that, Greg. And Lori, you said something a few minutes earlier that was, in the same theme. Can you, I would love to hear you say a little bit more about that, Lori. So this is where Greg's not being a jerk. Greg either didn't hear you. He might think he's building on your idea. Maybe Greg says it in a more powerful way, but this happens all the time. So great. It's a great example of where anybody in the room, you don't have to be a senior person. You can do that thing about, hey, Lori, can you go back? I want to hear a little bit more about you, where you were saying about the consumer implications of that decision, or the cultural implications, or the PR implications of that, whatever it is, and just pull it out of Lori. And then, so that's something anybody can do, regardless of level, regardless of gender. And then if you notice that this happens a lot, this is kind of the pattern recognition. So if you feel like, let's say I feel like, gosh, this happens to me all the time. I'm not a wallflower, but I feel like I get talked over a little bit in meetings. And so this is an example where the sort of pre-wiring or the meeting before the meeting, where I can say to a couple of allies, hey, there's a couple of things that I really want to make sure I get my point across in the meeting. And if I feel like I'm not getting, my point isn't being heard or whatever, can I ask for your help to amplify that? So everybody has agency. Everybody's responsible for themselves. So I can do that. I also, if see where my boss and C notices this and it's frustrating for her, she can also say to some people before the meeting, hey, I'm really working on getting Lori more exposure, getting her more promoted. But I notice every time I bring her to Bob's staff meeting, she just gets talked over. So, Joe and Chris, can I ask for your help in making sure that when she's speaking, you give her due, maybe ask some probing questions, but I would love to sort of pull you in as allies. So it's a little bit of the same kind of way we understand culture and meeting dynamics that we use for other reasons, use it also to help people kind of find their voice and not get talked over.
And the research says that not having your ideas valued is one of the biggest reasons why people check out. And it's just like they want to work at the company or whatever. So it's such an easy thing to do. And once whether it's an ally or a boss or whatever, once they're told to kind of think about that, when you come to the meeting, don't just think what's said, think about who said it. It would just be amazing. Greg in this case is just parroting what Lori said, but just with more, maybe more animated, more timber, maybe have a funny quip at the end, but it's literally that idea. And it's just so, and then when you start realizing that, it's just so easy to be like, oh, that's a great build on Lori's idea, it's without having, so there's a lot of great ways to kind of just move around that one without having to seeming like you're being petty.
The two words that pop in my head as y'all are talking about this, one is awareness,
Yes.
right? And the second is intentionality.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So it's hard to fix a problem that you don't know about, right?
Yep.
That's why I say feedback is a gift.
Yes.
Like I can't fix something I don't know is a problem. But then two is, and I really like the examples you guys are giving of like being intentional about what can we do now that we are aware of it.
Yeah.
What are the very easy, now, Lori, I think you undersell a little bit because you're very tactful in how you say these things, right? And it comes off very naturally, which would be, I suspect maybe a little bit harder for some other people, but it doesn't have to be this big overt correction, stop doing this. Hey, would you mind helping me out, while we're in this meeting? Because I do see this one little thing that kind of happens, and it would mean a lot to me personally if you could maybe help Lori in this. Done. Like, happy to do that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you all this. Let's because there's a couple things that I suspect there's been things that have either changed or are learnings for you all. What's the thing that has surprised you the most in the 3 years since the book's come out?
I think for me, C touched on it earlier, but I would not have bet money that the feedback that we would have gotten at a white shoe law firm in Manhattan would be the same feedback that we would get at the Naval Yard in Puget Sound up in the Pac Northwest. Like literally those are probably the two extremes in terms of like coast to coast and kind of the audience. I'm just amazed, maybe I shouldn't be, how universal these issues are. So even though every organization, they're like, well, we're really, I remember the first time we spoke to a law firm and they said, well, we're really different and And I was like, at the end of the conversation, I said to these guys, I was like, so instead of saying VP, just say partner. Yeah. Otherwise, they're just like Pepsi. Like it's the same thing. Their titles are different. They might call the client, something different. But like at the end of the day, people are people. And when you have more than two people together, you start to get organizational dynamics and culture. So I think for me, it's the like sort of how common some of these things are and how universal the behavior is. And therefore, that gets me excited because then I'm like, oh, we can actually have an impact. We don't have to write a different book for like an advertising agency versus a law firm versus a bank versus whatever. It's like, no, people are people. We all have bias. If you wake up in the morning, if you are alive, you have bias. It's there for sort of anthropological reasons. You're not trying to like pretend that you don't have it. Like you said, Bob, earlier, it's awareness and then intentionality about what you say or do or don't say or don't do. So I think that's kind of mine is I'm always surprised at the universality of the behavior and the messages.
What would you say, C?
I think the one thing that I have found really interesting that came out of the research and then we continue to talk to people is this concept of like what for our generation, when we were going through this, when we started our careers, in some cases, 30 years ago, when we went to business school, there were 20% of the people were women. And it was a very male dominated situation. And we had to accommodate. They were going to have the head role. They were going to be leading the task force. And so we kind of assumed that we were, in some cases, second-class citizens. And then talking to the younger women today, that's not the case at all. They went through, during, obviously, Title IX, girl power. They had all this thing that they had the world, they were getting the swim scholarships to Stanford swimming and doing this and leading the task force. And if anything, they were doing better in school. And I think all the data today would indicate that young boys are falling behind. They're not graduating high school at a higher rate. They're not going to college at a higher rate. They're not getting out of college at 4 years. I mean, it's just kind of odd there. So there's kind of this divide. And so I think the younger women that experience this, they almost thought, they're like, gosh, we're doing great. We're kind of passing these guys up. And then all of a sudden they get in the work world and all these dynamics kind of change because in fact, they're not getting understand some of the culture things and all these patterning that's happened. So I think we weren't surprised going into it. We kind of expected it. Like when someone's like, oh, we're taking a client to like Hooters for lunch. You're like, all right. Whereas like that stuff would never happen today. Like they have different expectations, and they're not as much. They don't want to accommodate as much. But I think they're surprised that they thought they had almost like had an advantage, had a lead based on a lot of these things. And the work world, it flips back around. So they are surprised. We weren't surprised. They're surprised.
Yeah. So as we record this in May, right? Yeah. 2025. It feels like with the Robbie Starbucks of the world, with President Trump, that, DEI or IND or whatever you want to call it, has created potentially some kind of I don't know if it's either an apathy or even a headwind towards this. Are you guys seeing changes in attitudes around this, or interest in engaging on topics like this?
I would say for right now, it's kind of early days. I think at this point, it seems as though I would say we haven't seen a big change yet. We'll see what happens in the future. I think what we have seen are people changing the language, and they're talking more about culture, and they're talking about inclusion, and maybe not D&I. So I think that there are a lot of some of the exact words are being changed, but we haven't seen. A lot of people are like, we want to continue. These programs that we're working, and we're getting results from them, and we're having more diverse teams and better outcomes, and so we're not changing that. But if changing some of the title of this so it doesn't become a whistleblower thing, we'll adjust the language. So I think it's more language than action, but who knows? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know, Lori, if you would agree with that.
Yeah, I think about it with a couple of lenses on. So C and I both serve on corporate boards, and, I've been to a lot of while C's out, in Puglia and Portugal, handstands. I'm at like a PwC thing and an ACT thing and a director's exchange. So I have this giant loser life where I'm like in Manhattan going to like events where board directors are talking about the impact of like the D&I backlash, while she is like posting these fabulous photos of herself all over the world. I have a lot to learn from my friend DC. But all kidding aside, I feel like from those meetings and whatever, what I'm seeing like as a board director, which certainly informs my work also for the Band of Sisters, what C's saying is very much true. People are, to a person, they're saying we're scrubbing our websites. We're making sure we don't have any of the sort of the faulty language on there. They're toning down the language a little bit to the extent that people have any kind of diversity goals or whatever as part of the CEO's objectives. They might be changing some of the compensation things. But to a person, what we're hearing is people saying, if they were doing all of the, I won't say D&I, if they were doing all of the inclusion and diversity or an inclusion and belonging things because they understood fundamentally that it was good for business, what they're now saying is, we're going to keep doing it. We'll make sure our websites are clean. Everybody has government contracts. Everyone sells something to the government. And so I think everyone's just being a little bit careful about sort of what they say, what's on their website, what's in their CEO compensation goals. But in terms of like the culture, if they understood it at their core, they're not really changing what they do. And the people for whom it was performative are the first people to go. I've literally heard people say it out loud. And I kind of look at them like, you said the quiet part out loud. Did you not realize was in the room? And they say things like, oh, good. Now we don't have to add a female board director. Or we don't.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. And for those people, what I would say is they never truly understood the business benefit of diverse teams make better decisions, diverse teams have better business outcomes. And so for those people where it was performative, they're the first people to just change everything. And I'm not saying we'll never get to those people, but there's a whole world out there of people who want to learn and who want to talk to us, who, like C said, they might be changing a couple things on their website, but they're not fundamentally changing how they go to market.
And I hope they're my competitors.
I literally, when I heard that, it was, you remember the old, like on David Letterman or whatever, people used to do spit takes, where they'd like spit water all over. I almost did a spit take. I just couldn't believe that people were so comfortable saying it out loud. But it's a good reminder of not everybody really bought into how important inclusion, diversity, belonging, how important all of that is to having better business results.
And there's no shortage of the empirical data that just sort of bears all that out.
Exactly.
Right. And so then, you use the term or something along the lines of like willful ignorance early, like that is willful. Like you're choosing to not know for whatever reason. And it's going to catch up to you because somebody else is going to get, the better talent. They're going to retain the better talent. They're going to get the innovation that comes from better talent, and they're going to eat you for lunch, and then it's going to be one of those companies that don't you remember that company that's not in the Fortune 500 anymore? Kind of companies, right? Because as you say, it's very performative and completely missing like why this matters to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
One thing that you had mentioned the term earlier, I want to make sure that we don't lose this, is allyship. So, maybe this is part of the evolution, over 3 years. Talk to us about what allyship even means, and then how you all see that manifesting.
Yeah, I'll take that. I think from the get-go. So when we first wrote this book, and you can tell from the title, we started out, we were interviewing, as C mentioned earlier, we did hundreds of interviews, and we started out interviewing women, probably 25 to 40, I mean, roughly in the sort of the next generation of leaders. And as C said, sadly, we learned that everything that we had experienced, it might look a tiny bit different. It looks a little different in a digital world. It looks a little different on Zoom, but sadly, none of it had magically evaporated. But I think we thought we were talking to women. And then a couple of things happened, which is, one, we realized, wait a minute, why are we going to write a book that is basically putting another thing on women's shoulders? Like, you go solve this. Like, you're less than, you're more than 50% of the population. You're way less than 50% of the C-suite, way less than 50% of boards. But we're going to be another group of women that are going to write a book to tell you how you need to solve this. So practically, because we are very practical people, what we realized is, like, mathematically, none of this is going to get solved if you don't bring men into the conversation. And you do that in a way that is not about calling men out, but rather inviting them in or calling them in to the conversation. So I think very early on, we realized we need to bring men into this conversation. Mm-hmm. And when we started speaking, we've spoken, I don't know, probably a dozen times. We're to an all female audience. And I would say, like, our jokes get bigger laughs and everyone loves it. Katie always says it's like, like someone like, drinking warm milk, like it just goes down so nice, but it doesn't change anything. You have to get the men in the room who have the power and the numbers and the ability to change things. So I think pretty early on, we realized we need to include men in this. And then over the course of the past 2.5, 3 years, people keep asking us, what else can I do as an ally? What else can I do as a male ally? And so that's really energizing to me. If we ever wrote another book, I think it would be about the power of allyship and specifically practically what can men do. But because no one else wants to write another book right now, part of what we're doing is—
and don't wish a pandemic on us either, because that sounds like the key to getting you out to write a book. So please no.
Yeah, exactly. But what we are doing is we're doing a series of like really deep dive interviews with senior men about allyship. And I think, Bob, what we've realized is many of the men that we know that are so naturally good at being allies and sponsors, they're like unconsciously competent. They're so good at it, but they've never really thought about why or what or how. And so that's part of what we're trying to do, is just understand from them, what do they do? And so be able to share that in a way.
That's really interesting. Unconsciously competent.
Yeah. It's my favorite 2x2. My life is a big series of 2x2s, even though I never worked for BCGs. So, the conscious, unconscious, competent, incompetent. Mm-hmm. I love that little 2x2, but I think this is one where the people that are the best at it just kind of comes, I think they come by it really naturally. And we think we can learn and therefore share some of that learning.
Yeah.
And in these various presentations we've done, I have to say that people, I'd say, 95% of the are totally like they want to do the right thing. Whether they might not be in the conscious whatever the 2x2 whatever, they might not be doing it great right now, but they want to. They're like, oh, this is great. Yes, yeah. In some cases, when they do that, they're like, it'd be an ally, like, oh gosh, I do have power. I could do something that meeting. I could say like, hey, let's, that example we gave of her not offering the woman the job because you're assuming she won't take it. Like, hey, let's ask Lori if she wants a job. If she doesn't want to take it, she can tell us and we'll move on. But let's just not make that decision for her. So it's an easy way to kind of just say like, hey, let's just, like you're not having to make a big stand. You're just, and it's like, oh God, there's many small things that you can do to kind of advocate for people without having to stick your neck out too much. And I think
so super quick as a practical thing, from an allyship perspective, what is your all's observation of the 1, 2, 3 things that this sort of unconsciously competent ally does? What are things that you do see people doing really well?
I feel like in some cases, after we go through a litany of examples and different stories, I feel like in some cases they're now just listening better. Like the one I always go off on a major tangent about the word girl in the workplace, right? That's one of my big things that sets my hair on fire. And then we kind of give examples you wouldn't say we just hired a new boy out of Yale. You'd say, have you met the new boy in accounting? It's like laughable. And once they hear that and say, yeah, you would, then people will say, gosh, I won't ever say that again. Now that I hear it, it sounds like broken glass. But up until that point, they were just being, never thought about it. And actually women can say the same thing. So in some cases, again, if they're now know like, gosh, who is saying something, who's over talking someone, who is volunteering to do the work. In some cases, just being more aware, it just it just now sticks out like a sore thumb. I'm not going to call someone a girl. Someone does call a girl, I'm going to maybe say, oh, you mean that great woman in accounting? And there's a way to kind of do that, be conscious of office housework. I mean, just using some of the examples, it's just they're now more aware, and it's just easy for them to now sidestep and help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would add to that, I agree with that. I don't remember if we told this story in the book, but I think when we were writing the book, we were in Nantucket. Sounds very bougie. I guess it is.
It's because it is.
We were walking out to the lighthouse and we were not conscious that there was any wind whatsoever. It was just like a beautiful day. And then we were walking back. It wasn't long enough that the weather had changed. And all of a sudden there's this wind at our face. And we were all so conscious of like the wind, and we were walking into the wind, and we thought, we like had the discussion out loud. We kind of labeled it about like, oh, when the wind was at our back, we weren't conscious of it. But then when they were at our face, we were conscious of it. And I think it's a perfect metaphor about, like C said, it's part about being conscious. But I think the other thing that great allies do is they have a learning mindset. So they don't have this, well, I didn't mean anything by it. They have a mindset of, every day I want to do better at something else. I want to learn something. I'm not going to be defensive. When someone calls me out or calls me in, I'm going to be like, oh, you know what? You're right. I didn't think about it that way, but you're right. I can improve. How might I? What else can I do? Again, I'll never forget this leader at one of the companies where he was like, can I ask one more thing? Like, what else? Like, tell me one more. It was such a learning mindset for him of, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this, but I want to be better. So I think that consciousness combined with like a humble learning mindset, it's kind of the same for anything, right? We happen to be talking about male allyship, but I think it's kind of the same things that help you in so many aspects of your business life and probably your real life too.
But yeah, it's funny talking about the learning, and you use the word humble, and I was thinking humility. Like, I mean, you have to come at it and not defensive, because honestly, sorry, C, the girl in accounting kind of thing, or the HR girl or whatever, like, and I've kind of laid that at the feet of my Southernness. Like, well, that would be a Southern thing of like, didn't mean anything by it, like zero malice. You're not talking down, but it's like, but Bob, how you meant it and how it's received, are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, that's a good point. So but then, as you say, then you're like, I have the awareness, And
Yeah.
now it does sound like broken glass. You're like,
Yeah.
I probably could have done better, but now I know. And so
Well, you sort of,
today's
yeah,
the first day I can get better.
it's I think that mindset of like, you also have to consider the audience, right? So one of my favorite examples, I'm from New Jersey, so I probably say you guys 6,327 times a day. It is every other word that comes out of my mouth. It is a non-gendered expression. I mean, we say use guys, you know, when I lived in the South, people would say y'all and all y'all.
All y'all. That's the plural of y'all is all y'all.
All y'all. I love all y'all. And anyway, so I don't think anything of when I say you guys, but I was listening to a podcast, it was probably the Neuro Leadership Institute or one of those, and they were saying, if you're a team leader, ask your team. Say, hey, you know what? I'm from New Jersey. I realize I say you guys a lot. I don't mean it in a gendered way, but for some women, they find that very offensive. And somebody used the example of like, some people are just like, they put in their vocabulary. They're just like, okay, team. One of my friends, she's worked in corporate America. She always says, okay, people, like, and she's just sort of changed her. It's like a little vocabulary hack, because she realized that, you know what, some people were offended by it and they thought it was gendered. And it wasn't that she was getting canceled or anything. She just asked people. And when they said, well, no, it doesn't bother us, but all else being equal, we'd rather you didn't call a bunch of women guys. Fine. She was like, okay, just as easily say, okay, team. Okay, peeps. You can find a fun conversational way of doing it. So if you take the attitude of like, I'm going to listen and learn, you listen and learn.
Yeah. So let's wind this up. So first of all, I hope people will read the book. What's next for you guys? Sounds like it's not writing another book, but what is next for you all?
Yeah. Well, we're continuing to speak, so that's been, continues to be great. And whether it's been virtual or in person, we're doing that. And then we're doing a lot of stuff that's kind of more in the culture and leadership, kind of a very broad banner, and we're looking at more specific topic areas. One on mentorship and sponsorship, and that seems that's a huge area that people have a lot of interest in. And then the other one is kind of in the giving and receiving feedback, and kind of doing a deep dive in those two areas. So that's kind of our next area of a focus.
Well, I appreciate everything that you all are doing. I know personally I've benefited from it. It's a tremendous pleasure and privilege to be able to share, what you all have taught me, what you all have taught so many people. And, I just really believe that just driving awareness, because I do believe, most people aren't trying to offend or do anything. They just don't know. And they're, habits, maybe sometimes lazy habits that form. You talked about culture. Culture is just how stuff gets done here, but we can change culture. Right. Mm-hmm. And I love the example of, Bob, why don't you take the notes today? Lori seems to do that a lot. That's easy, and we can change it. So again, I appreciate, kind of helping people like me understand what's going on. 2, what to do about it when I see it. And then 3, just realizing that none of this, as you said, C, is building a train line. It's going to cost $10. Like, I can do something today to make the world better. And you all and your 4 other sisters are making the world better, and it's little bits by little bits, and it took a while to get here. It's going to take a while to get, out of where we're at. And hopefully one day it will be like getting complimented for putting your seatbelt on. We'll see. but Lori and C, I just appreciate y'all so much. And again, thank you for everything you're doing. And thanks for joining me today.
All right. Thanks for talking to us.
Awesome. And everyone who's listening or watching, thank you so much. And we hope to see you on the next episode of Career Club Live. Thank you.